San Francisco, the city where a lot of tech companies have set up shop, with some of them building very tall buildings in the downtown area. A quick Googling reveals some very familiar names, among them Airbnb, Atlassian, Dropbox, Uber, and their closest competitor Lyft, Reddit, Salesforce, Square, and many more. As one of the hubs of Silicon Valley, the city has seen rising costs of living over many decades and is considered one of the most expensive places to live in the world today. It should come as no surprise to anybody now that with the progress of communication and collaboration tools, that the accessibility to work remotely has enabled workers employed by these tech companies to do their jobs from locations more affordable than in or near the city center. In addition to this overall flight from unaffordable housing, people working on a hybrid schedule may choose to live a bit further out if they only need to go into the office 2 or 3 times a week. The overall result of this is that the demand for real estate in the city of San Francisco is diminished, at least a little bit. A glance at the city from a bird's eye view reveals to us a glaring problem: the lack of densification. The downtown area is only a few blocks in diameter, with a narrow and quickly tapering corridor of tall buildings in the southern direction. Vast sprawls of low-rise buildings surround the downtown, which would, under more objective terms, be easily densified. But then you might say, as with the residents of said sprawl, that building upward would change the neighborhood and push out people already living there. And the problem with that is San Francisco is faced with an unsustainable arrangement where hundreds of thousands of people pay either way too much in rent or have to commute an unreasonable distance on a daily basis, at least before the pandemic, all while skyscrapers they work at are surrounded by a sea of low density buildings. No matter whose side you're on, one of them will give out at some point. The pandemic that has changed the world and continues to do so since its proliferation in 2020 was the final nail in the balloon of ever-rising costs to do business in downtown San Francisco. Patch.com reports, in a response to a July letter of inquiry from Supervisor Catherine Stefani about the state of the city's downtown commercial properties, Chief Economist Ted Egan noted that the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting increase in employees working remotely have increased office vacancy in the city from roughly 5% pre-pandemic to 24% in the third quarter of 2022. That's a 19% increase in office vacancies over the course of 2.5 years. And if I had to guess, it's only going to get worse unless vacancies get translated to a lower rent. After all, why drag your company to one of the most expensive places on earth just because? The city, however, does not see this hurting the treasury all that much. Even with that increase in direct vacancies, the city may not see a large loss in property tax revenue due to Proposition 13, the 1978 ballot initiative that capped property tax rate increases at 2% each year. Because the market value of much of the city's property has skyrocketed in recent decades, most office space is currently assessed below its market value. Property tax revenue would thus be cushioned somewhat even as an office building's market value declines slightly. Some might say that a lack of consequences upon the city to fix the root cause of this mess will only further enable mismanagement and continued stonewalling against either building more appropriately scaled residential buildings or, and this would never happen, tearing down office buildings for which there are no tenants. So what's actually being done about the situation? San Francisco Mayor London Breed had this to tell Bloomberg. Breed said she sees an opportunity for San Francisco to reinvent, recreate, and reinvest in vacant commercial properties. That includes attracting other types of office tenants, notably in the biotechnology and green tech industries, to spur growth and expand beyond the city's traditional base. This approach actually makes a lot of sense within today's constraints. Tech has lightly made its move, pun intended, and broadening the demographic of tenants to biotech and green tech companies seems like a great complement to the tech industry that's still located in San Francisco. And now we get to a potential solution that I really like: converting office buildings for residential use. The obvious obstacle to this approach is money, but the cost needs to be weighed against the cost of not doing it as well. A vacant building will eventually lose more potential revenue than an investment into repurposing would cost as a one-time expense. The San Francisco Chronicle explored this approach, citing Calgary, Alberta as a proof of concept. It also looked too expensive and difficult in Calgary, Alberta until the government did something about it. Canadian officials responded to the long-term decline of its business district with a 10-year, $1 billion initiative, equivalent to about $721 million to transform the area into a diverse, thriving neighborhood, in large part by funding and fast-tracking projects that convert offices to housing. We are talking about large sums of money, but the result is a place where people live and congregate as opposed to an urban blight. Money alone is not the only obstacle that needs to be cleared, as one architecture firm points out. As it stands today, these projects are unfeasible, speculated Strachan Forgan, principal at SCB, the architecture and design firm for one of the city's few recent conversions at 100 Van Ness, a 28-story glass-covered building that yielded 418 housing units near City Hall when it was completed in 2015. Projects like that could become more possible if construction prices fall off a cliff because of the recession, or if the government changes policies to make them cost less, he said. Efforts to make projects more doable would need to survive the city's fractious politics and factor in the major costs to developers of satisfying the city's affordable housing requirements. San Francisco needs money, politics, and red tape to be managed simultaneously to get such a project done, but surely there are low-hanging fruit buildings that may be easier to take on than others. The city of San Francisco has a lot of options for what it can do to resolve its vacancies, exorbitant real estate market, and perhaps a misplaced sense of preservation. A tiny, very dense core cannot be supported by a sea of 3 to 5 story buildings while remaining affordable. This is very clearly the case here, with housing demand vastly outweighing the supply. Now, I'm not advocating the outright demolition of the Mission District, that would be insane, or the construction of a West Coast billionaires row next to the Salesforce Tower. Densification takes time to do properly, but it does require starting somewhere. Mixed-use mid-rise buildings, in my opinion, that's like 10 stories or so, with plenty of units for people to live in, will relieve the pressure on the overall situation when they replace townhouses. The urban core could host high-rise apartment buildings for people working in that area. If a new building can support 100 more units than the buildings it's replacing, that's 100 fewer households clogging up the rest of the area. And before you go, Bubba, it's going to be luxury housing. Yeah, they need to address that too, and densification needs to be the top priority. When the number of available units starts to be more reasonable, they will be priced at a level where normal people could actually consider living in the city. In the end, the people of San Francisco will face either repurposing office buildings to create that supply, building upward residentially in yet untapped neighborhoods, or simply downsizing the city over time. That's all I've got for this video. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and until next time, work from wherever you can afford to actually live.